Hi everyone, let's recap the observation tools. This L shape here, two L shapes kind of placed together, is a very effective way to basically create a aperture and a dimension that will correspond with the dimension of the composition. So let's say if you have a canvas ready to go, you can position this so that it corresponds with the dimension of the canvas, and then hold up this square in front of the composition just to see how everything will kind of work. As you have found the kind of dimension that you're looking for, make sure that you stretch out your arm. I also like to balance one arm with the other just to support it a bit better. Close one eye in order for this to work, and then look with the other eye. So then you have a bit of a distance between your observation to this. Don't hold it like this, because then you're not going to see it in relationship to the composition. So you close one eye and hold this up in front of the composition that you are working with. And then you can also, by moving either a bit further away or a bit closer to your composition, change the scale of the composition in relationship to this square. This is a great way to become familiar with exactly the composition of your still life, but of course you can also use this in other genres such as portraiture, figure, landscape, really anything that you choose. And now, speaking about composition, here we have this sort of store-bought instrument right here, which already have gridded up a composition into rules of thirds. This, I think, can work quite well when one have a format of a canvas that corresponds quite closely to what one have right here. So again, if one hold this up in front of the composition, and you can kind of see how these lines may correspond to the composition as divided by horizontal and vertical thirds. So this, again, very classical way of composing, so that you can, for example, place a central point of interest within these thirds. It's also a way to avoid any tangency on the vertical or horizontal center line. So if one, instead of, for example, risking placing a major point of interest right on the horizontal or vertical center line, place it on these third kind of proportions, then that's a nice way of creating a dynamic harmony. Now, please remember also this very easy instrument right here, basically just these two little squares, cut a hole or a little window in the center of them. This is really just effective when you have two. Again, if you have one of these and you just let that move back and forth, it's actually not as effective as having two of these. So that you place one window in front of your composition and the second window in front of your painting, so that you can compare from a one-to-one perspective what the color and the values in the various zones are. This is a very helpful tool also when drawing. So when you are working with values and with the absence of color, you can still use this, because squinting down and then seeing how dark a shadow can be or a dark halftone and how light the light is. Again, it's a really strong tool so that we can organize the values in the various areas of the composition. And of course, color when we're working with the context of paint. So color, the way that we observe color and value is quite relative, and sometimes we can kind of get thrown off by the very relationships that may exist surrounding a color and a value in an area of the composition, for example. So a very common mistake is that if one, let's say, plays a very dark contrast in the area of the shadow on the canvas, and if one haven't keyed the whole painting yet, one may get a little bit concerned that now it appears to be disconnected from the area of the light. So what often happens then is that instead of kind of relying on that key and building a value between the darkest dark and the lightest light, one can risk keying up the shadow shape too light. So as a way to both observe well, and as well as just being confident about the color and the values that you are seeing, and trusting that sometimes during the process you're going to have a momentary disconnect between the darkest dark and the lightest light, once you have keyed it. And just trust that you'll be able to connect those contrasts once you work with the transitional halftones that will bridge the connection of the dark and light. So again, relying on this as a tool just to see well the color and the value, and as a way to just check what the color and the value destination is in a given area. You can already see what the color and the value is in a given zone, even before you have committed to modeling the form with said color and value. In the block-in process of this still life composition, we also used the barbecue skewer quite a bit. And you can buy a bundle of this, of course. It's just barbecue skewers. Very sort of easy equipment to use as well in the context of drawing and painting. Now, if you have a knitting needle in this dimension, feel free to use that as well. The beautiful thing about the barbecue skewer is that it's relatively slender and relatively even all the way through, whereas a painting brush tends to be a little bit wider, and it also have some area that is a bit wider and then narrower. So this is a little bit easier actually to make comparisons and observations with. So just to recap the way that you can observe with the barbecue skewer, let's say you can close your eye, one eye, and then place your thumb on one area of the barbecue skewer. And then you have the tip of the skewer that will correspond also with a measurement. So let's see if I'm going to make a measurement between A and B. This distance is what I'm looking for. So then I close one eye, place, and I can also stabilize one arm with the other. And then I just move the thumb until I find the width that I'm searching for, and then I can place it over to my still life to make a direct comparison. This works well when you're working in sight size, where you're basically translating the same scale that you are observing to, so that the scale that you are observing your composition, you're going to translate the same scale into your painting. But you can also use this as an observation tool when you're using comparative measurement techniques, by, for example, observing distance from A to B and then seeing how many such distances that exist within the format of the composition, and then translate that mode of comparison into your painting during the block-in process especially. But of course you can use this all the way through the painting process. So whenever you are running into questions about gesture and proportion, this is a very effective observation tool. Now, another way that you can use the barbecue skewer or knitting needle or equivalent as an observation tool is if you want to explore the relative inclination between 2 points, or if you're working with a contour that has a very visible inclinations that you're searching for, you can also hold this up and then rotate it until it clicks into the corresponding inclination that you're searching for, and then translate that into your composition. So it's also very effective as a measurement for these elements of gesture. And of course it follows that as you are looking at how elements in a composition may be relating to each other from a vertical proportional point of view, you can hold this horizontally just to see where these different vertical proportions relate. And the same is true for looking at vertical proportions. So you can look at the vertical proportions just by placing it vertically, letting it move into the various zones that you are searching for these relationships, just to see how the vertical alignments between various points are configured. Now, we also worked with the plumb line in this still life painting process. Then we also used the plumb line as a way to check the vertical and horizontal center line of the composition. Remember, as you are positioning this vertical center line in the center of your composition, also make sure that you are checking the vertical direction of the edges of the canvas. So place the plumb line on the edge of the canvas first to make sure that that is 100% vertical before you place it in the center and then line it up with a ruler, for example. Now, building upon the sort of element of physics and gravity, we also used the plumb line to check the relative symmetry of the various objects in this still life composition. So remember that you can use this also to investigate kind of specific objects in your still life painting. So if you're painting a vase or a bottle or anything that has a relative consistent symmetry on either side of the contour, you can place this plumb line in the center of the object and then measure what the distance are on each side of that plumb line. This is a wonderful way to catch any inaccuracies that can tend to sort of sneak in to the contours of a symmetrical object. So remember that if you're working with something that is symmetrical, where you will find various anchor points on one side of the contour, you will also find the same anchor points, those same plane breaks on the other side. So we can also consider that objects has kind of proportions, they have anatomy as well. So just making sure that the relative anatomical landmarks on the one side correspond symmetrically with the other side. Again, just using this as a kind of mechanical instrument, just quickly check how the general alignment is between various points. Very powerful tool that we can use in combination with pure observation techniques. My favorite observation tool, I think, is going to be the mirror. The mirror can almost compare to having a visual superpower, because seeing the composition or seeing nature in the mirror from its different perspectives is a very effective way at seeing nature abstractly. And it is a bit of a paradox that in the tradition of representational painting, we have to practice observing nature abstractly in order to see it visually. Using the mirror for this endeavor is a great way to gain a fuller perspective, visual perspective, over the visual manifestations of structure as nature presents. So now let's recap the different mirror observation techniques. So mirror observation 101, just looking to the mirror in reverse. So if you hold it, you can hold it maybe on the side of your nose like this. I like to position the mirror on my face somewhere so I can balance it. If you want to hold it up in the air, you can do that, but I just prefer to do this. And so that I use my head to stabilize the position of the mirror. You want to make sure that you're not leaning it in any way, because it starts to move the reflection around. So if you're looking for a kind of completely reverse reflection without any distortions, any perspective distortions, just make sure that you're holding it sort of nice and straight, with a straight edge on the mirror and not tilting it like this or like that. It is very effective to observe in the mirror just with one eye. Doesn't work as well. I find that I always want to close one eye to see better when looking into the mirror. So now that you have it like this, you can position it a little bit back and forth to find a bit where the position of your still life painting and still life composition kind of are positioned side by side in the reflection. So what you're seeing then is basically the composition and your painting in reverse. And even just that little change can be a wonderful way to get a refreshed perspective over the still life composition. Most of us will tend to create a slight asymmetry in the objects that we design, unless we use different methods, like for example different observation techniques to cross-reference with, to secure a good translation of the symmetry and proportion of the various objects that we're working with. So again, if you haven't already used the mirror, I think you're going to enjoy seeing what it can do in terms of reflecting back with an answer as you are searching for the symmetrical translation of the various forms. Now, if you find that as you look into the mirror reverse, suddenly it looks like the jar that you were just working on is sort of tilting a bit. That's exactly why using the mirror is really helpful, so that you can catch any such inclinations that most of us will tend to make unless we are aware of it and use different tools of observation to catch those tendencies. Now, another of my sort of favorite mirror techniques is just looking at nature upside down. So in this situation, I just place the mirror again on the bridge of my nose, and then I just tilt the mirror, maybe my head a little bit so I don't see the side of the mirror, but a little bit into the mirror, so that I can see nature upside down. So when we see nature upside down, it becomes a very effective way of observing nature abstractly, especially when you are working with a still life composition where everything has to kind of work or tend to work within the principle of gravity, for example. So when you then look at your composition upside down, and you're going to, I think, notice more the abstract shape configurations that essentially exist. And so the bottom of the objects is now going to be on the top of the composition. So as you're seeing the reflection of this composition upside down, it's going to defy gravity. And I think through that, it kind of brings us into a very abstract mindset. So what I tend to do when I view the composition upside down is that I will let my eye kind of travel back and forth a few times between the composition and the painting, like a tennis match, go back and forth. And I will look at a number of elements. For example, I will squint down to look at the shadow shape configuration. I will look at the shape of the light. Maybe I will engage with the negative shapes existing between the various forms. Maybe I will travel in a rhythm, kind of look at the contour, moving into a contour of another object. So there will be many ways that I'll be observing nature upside down, essentially. So now I encourage you to really explore this as a tool and to become familiar with it. And maybe it feels a little bit unnatural to begin with, but I think then it only should be an impetus to practice more so that this becomes second nature. And the more you become familiar with using mirror technique, not just in one way, but also by cross-referencing, you are essentially then looking at mirror through many different perspectives. And through those perspectives, you're gaining insight and information that will strengthen the whole translation of the visual manifestation of nature.
There is a lot of value in online art education. We have so much great instruction on NMA that is so easily accessible. Even when I was in school learning to draw and paint, nothing was online. Wherever you are in the world, you can get this instruction. And not only can you watch these lessons that are so valuable and so in-depth and so passionately instructed, but you can watch them again and again and again.